So welcome everyone. I'm Eileen Everett, the Director of Environmental Education of New Mexico, and welcome to our first webinar as part of our Fall 2020 webinar series, introducing outdoor learning at home, in communities, and at school. And we're so fortunate today to have Estrella with us, and we're going to be diving into an introduction into social and emotional learning. I'm going to get a taste of some things that we can really start thinking about in terms of transforming our own practices to better include social and emotional learning to support our kids. And before we jump into that conversation, just wanted to provide a little bit of context about who we are as an organization and why we're even doing a webinar series like this, especially right now during COVID-19. And our organization, Environmental Education of New Mexico, is part of the North American Association for Environmental Education's affiliate network, which is comprised of 55 other affiliate organizations like ours. And we're so fortunate today to have Estrella, who is from our counterpart in California, to come share her knowledge and wisdom around social and emotional learning. As an organization, we've gone through a 3-year process to redefine who we are and to rethink our mission, vision, and strategic direction. And thanks to so many of you, we've been able to do a community-generated process where we've had over 200 individuals be thought leaders with us with rethinking our work. And our new vision is best captured in this slide, and our new phrase, which is every kid, every day, every way. So as an organization, we value supporting every New Mexican child, pre-K through 12th grade, every day, so those daily opportunities in school, out of school, right outside of our doors, in our local communities, as well as further away experiences and exploring the outdoors. And every way really is a way to honor the many different ways to approach environmental and outdoor learning, especially in a place like New Mexico, where we have just an abundance of opportunities to be outside. Our mission is through implementing an advocacy-focused movement, as well as advancing collaboration and leadership, Environmental Education of New Mexico will ensure every New Mexico child has equitable access to environmental and outdoor learning. I also want to take a moment to highlight our incredible 17 Exploring Equitable Education Outdoors Fellows who have been deep in systems thinking and mapping this year and are in the process of putting the final touches on the country's first community-generated pathway for systems change to provide equitable daily access to the outdoors and environmental learning for all of our kids. So thank you to all of our fellows, and we actually have some of our fellows on the call today. I also want to highlight an upcoming event this weekend. So this Sunday, 10:10 at 10 a.m., it's easy to remember, some of our fellows will be sharing a little bit more about the fellowship and this shared community vision for every kid, every day, every way, thanks to our partners at Pekeki Open Space and Cottonwood Gulch Expeditions. So please feel free to join us on Sunday and hear from the fellows more about their work and the conversations going on. I also do want to mention that the fastest way to be in the know about information from our organization is to join our free statewide listserv. You can do that by visiting our website at eenn.org. And if you click under join, there's an option to join the EcoEd listserv. So we definitely encourage you to sign up and stay apprised of our events. I'd also like to take a moment to have us ground ourselves. And I'd like to invite all of you, if you don't already have your feet planted on the ground, to take a moment to do so and find yourself, whether you're sitting or if you're standing, to just feel yourself connected with our lands and to just take a moment to pause and acknowledge that here in New Mexico, we have many histories, some of which have been told, some of which that have been intentionally made invisible, and we want to acknowledge the many histories of the lands of New Mexico, especially the histories of our indigenous people and our over 20 Native nations, and to pause and acknowledge that the past events still have impacts and trauma today for many of our people in New Mexico, and that whenever we are talking about outdoor learning for us to bring this awareness around the lands that we are working on, playing on, and living on. So before we get going, I'm just going to have everybody pause, reflect in whatever way is meaningful for you, for us to acknowledge the spaces that we're in. Thank you. I'm also so excited to announce that as of about an hour ago, we received word that our new outdoor learning guidance has been released by the Public Education Department and distributed to teachers and school administrators around the state. We are just so excited for the fellows and our leadership team and so many of you out in the community that worked with us on this outdoor learning guidance to really lift up the opportunity for outdoor learning at home, in communities, and at school during COVID-19. This guidance, along with a variety of resources available on our new website, outdoorlearningnm.org. I do also want to highlight that this is part one of a three-part webinar series. Our second webinar is on standards-aligned outdoor learning, and our third webinar will be on culturally responsive outdoor learning. So we definitely encourage you to check out those other opportunities as well. And I am going to now switch gears, and it is really my pleasure to introduce Estrella Reisinger, who is, again, working for our counterpart organization in California. And Estrella, it's such a pleasure to have you join us here in New Mexico virtually, and to really share your advice and wisdom with us to help us all in our journeys for better understanding social and emotional learning. And the little bit that I've learned from Estrella, I'm just really excited to dig in and learn more from you today. So let's all give a warm New Mexico welcome virtually to Estrella.
All right. Thanks, Eileen. It's just really terrific to be here. Again, my name is Estrella, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And as Eileen said, I am her counterpart in California. I'm the executive director of AEOE, which is the Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education. Recently, I served as the National Education Manager for NatureBridge, which is the largest educational partner of the National Park Service. And that's really where I was focusing on this work and where my journey started. I hope this doesn't turn you against me, but while I am a fan of all things chili, I should share that I do tend to lean towards green these days. I know those could be fighting words, so I hope that you'll forgive me. Uh, well, I am so honored that Eileen invited me to be here today. First, I should share that I'm no expert. I continue to learn about SEL and how it shows up or doesn't in different contexts and what we can do to support social and emotional learning in different settings. I was leading a workshop on SEL last weekend, and I'll admit I had this moment where as I was driving in the car, I've been very lucky to be sheltering with my parents these past few months, and I've got two young kids, and was taking them over there so I could present this workshop. And it was a hard morning. It was one of those mornings where I was not my best self. And here I am reflecting on like, oh, I was yelling at my kids on the way to an SEL workshop, like, heck. But that's part of the journey, right? We keep trying, we practice, we remind ourselves. And that's why it's such an honor and a delight to get to have this conversation with you. I do come from an educational background and have been focusing on the intersections between social and emotional learning and environmental education for several years, and was the lead on a national partnership on SEL, which I'll share a little bit about our product, our work, later on. I am coming at you live from Oakland, California. I sit on stolen land that has been cared for by Chicheño Ohlone for millennia. I'm going to share my appreciation for the past and present stewardship of this place I call home, and commit to shaping a future here that is just. Nature centers and environmental education programs often sit on public land, and in some cases, national, state, or regional parks. Acknowledgement of the original inhabitants and being transparent about the site and the region's history is an important aspect of helping students to develop a sense of place and model inclusivity and equity, essential components of SEL. For me, social and emotional learning can't really be fully separated from equity and inclusion work. And while they aren't the same, there is a tremendous amount of overlap. And being aware of where you are and the history of that place are really important components of authentic SEL. I know there's a lot of awareness in New Mexico, I would say probably more so than California about tribal history. But if you're not familiar with those two sites there that are linked, they are a great place to start. So I'd love to know a little bit more about where you all are coming from, and actually specifically what brought you here to this webinar. So this is your first opportunity to engage in the chat, and it would be really great to hear from several folks just kind of what made you join us today. And I'll give a little pause, give you a minute to reflect and share. That's great. So we have people who have been practicing mindfulness experience within formal and informal education settings. Excellent. Yeah, there are folks who are in it right now, doing the work with their students, wanting to find ways to explore the outdoors. Excellent. People who are drawn just because of EE&M. I'm seeing mindfulness coming up again. Thinking about how we can be using outdoor spaces to support learning, especially in our current time. Some folks who are more new to SEL. Excellent. This is great. Well, keep sharing. I'm going to keep going. But this is really helpful, and really just thinking about the full range of experiences that are coming to this space, and some of what I share might be brand new for you, and some of it you may have heard before, and I'm going to ask you to kind of be patient with me if there's stuff that feels repetitive, but hopefully there will be something new and something that will excite you and get you thinking about ways that you can work with your students or with your staff. Awesome. Well, these are my goals today. I hope that during our time together, we will increase everyone's understanding of SEL, kind of no matter what your entry point is, that we will have some opportunities to actually practice some of the strategies ourselves. And I will be modeling some ideas, and you all will have some opportunities to engage. This will be an interactive session. And even for folks who are joining later on, viewing the recording, I hope that you will take moments to pause and reflect, and perhaps even think about how you can participate as well, just to make the learning that much more meaningful. And then I will share a toolkit that has a number of resources that I'm hoping you might get to explore later on and dig into on your own. So this is what this will actually look like. This gives you a little bit of a sense, kind of our roadmap for what our time will be together. And again, I hope to bring in opportunities for interaction and reflection throughout. So kind of getting into the why. We've already talked about our goals. Really look at that intersection, between SEL and environmental ed. And we will get to explore that toolkit I mentioned. So first I wanted to start with this big question of why. And I think a lot of folks already have, a good sense and understanding that this is so important, and I'd say especially now. The research, does point at countless benefits to incorporating SEL in your instruction. And I wanted to just highlight a few of them. These are some of the number of studies over the last 10, 20 years have pointed to some of these particular outcomes. What we see is that quality social and emotional learning leads in the short term to SEL skill acquisition and improved attitudes about self, others, and schools. And in the long term, positive social behavior, academic success, fewer conduct problems, and less emotional distress. Most of the research is focused on school-age children, but I think it's important to notice, just to comment, that these skills are useful throughout life, right? For maintaining personal relationships, managing interactions with coworkers, making financially and socially responsible decisions, and maintaining emotional well-being. And these attitudes and skills are necessary for environmental literacy. In fact, decades of research show that teaching towards environmental literacy develops social and emotional learning. It shows that environmental education has helped to produce effective problem solvers, lifelong learners, and thoughtful community leaders and participants, many of the outcomes that we share and that we strive towards in our programming. The emotional and social skill related benefits that a number of studies indicate include increased self-esteem, autonomy, character development, maturity, empowerment, verbal communication, leadership, the ability to collaborate with others. Really, the list goes on and on. Students are also introduced to positive civic engagement opportunities as they addressed community environmental issues such as waste reduction, energy and water conservation, and sustainability practices. So really good stuff. We know this is important. So what exactly is SEL? This is a term that's thrown out a lot these days. And there actually are a number of terms that are used fairly interchangeably. You hear about 21st century skills, positive youth development, character building, you get the idea. What they're all really about is, how do we support young people to become caring, competent, engaged members of society? And while the term SEL has actually been around for decades, it's risen in prominence in recent years, particularly within formal school settings, as well as out of school or OST programs. And I wanted to share this definition here. This comes from CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they've really become kind of the leading institution helping to champion this work, especially in the formal school setting. And so, I wanted to first just make sure that you're aware of CASEL. They're a great resource. And if you are working with school-age children, and many of you said that you are, most of the school curriculums that we see that support SEL are centered around CASEL. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the CASEL terminology, just to make sure that we're all kind of familiar with the same framework. Before we move on, though, I want to highlight there's one word there that's really important. And you can see I've emphasized it in bold, and that is that SEL is a process. And, when I think about environmental literacy, similarly, right, there are certain skills that, yes, you can increase your ability or your understanding or your knowledge, but there's no end point. Like, you don't ever end your process with SEL. Case in point, yelling at my kids on the way to my parents' house the other day. And I appreciate that. Really, this helps us to think about this kind of constant reset, and how do we present ourselves in each new situation? How can we continue to grow and learn? And I'm seeing some comments coming in, so I'm going to just take a pause to make sure. Excellent, great. All right. So I mentioned CASEL. This image right here is one I want to make sure you all are familiar with. And what you see in the center there that looks kind of like a pie, those are often referred to as the 5 competencies. And really what those are the skills that we support our young people in developing when we are attending to their social and emotional learning. They've been called different things by different people and, within different institutions. But kind of within that general kind of idea is where we tend to see there's this like self-awareness and self-management component. So that looking inward, or that, intrapersonal growth that happens, and then that interpersonal, so how we interact with other people, those relationship skills, the social awareness, and then kind of culminating in what does this look like in action, and that's your responsible decision making. I want to point out also these kind of the concentric circles around the competencies, because that's really essential. A lot of SEL has focused on just that first circle, looking at the curriculum and instruction, thinking about SEL as, something that you do on Tuesday at 9:30 a.m., then you do it for an hour, and then you move on to the next subject. And I appreciate that their definition has now expanded, and they're really looking at, not just the curriculum, but how we're teaching, and not just what's happening in the walls of the classroom, but the school-wide practices. Really understanding that the setting is important, that there's a larger context in which learning is taking place. This includes also as well the family and community partnerships, and we know how important those relationships are. And one of the things that we've been doing in my work is also thinking about the natural world and how that can optimize social and emotional learning, and has a place. When we think about these rings, there's that natural setting in which all of these systems are nested. I think when we're looking at any type of framework, it's helpful to know exactly what we're talking about. And so wanted to kind of zoom in specifically to these CASEL competencies to make sure that you all have a better sense of what they mean by these terms. I know when I first brought them to our team at NatureBridge, even especially this one, self-management, was one that some folks found kind of off-putting. There was a reaction to it. And when we really looked into what it meant and the terminology, it made a lot more sense. And so I think that we may interpret some of these in different ways, but it is helpful to really understand, at least for the materials that CASEL has put out, what do they mean by responsible decision making, and kind of thinking about where empathy shows up, and I think for any of them you could do a deeper dive and would want to better understand what any of these terms mean. But I wanted to make sure that you all had kind of seeing some of the language, and we talk a lot about teamwork and problem solving, and I heard mindfulness come up several times earlier. So I think this could be another great opportunity just to think about the practice of mindfulness. What competency would you imagine that might support based on what you see here? What have you seen for those of you who have utilized mindfulness practices in your instruction? All of them. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of mindfulness, and yeah, we think about kind of self-awareness, self-management, definitely more focus on the self, and I love that. I think that there's definitely, I'd say that is more of a short-term impact, but when you imagine kind of how that then impacts your ability to interact with others, and be more grounded, more centered, perhaps have more clarity when it comes to decision making, you can absolutely see where there's crossover. So while it is helpful to think about these in terms of these domains, you can see there's tremendous overlap, and growth in one area can often support and lead to growth in another area. Now that we just kind of went deep into CASEL, I do want to throw out another framework, only because their work is just so fascinating, and I think it's another great resource to look at. This is just another image, and summarizes work that was done by the SOLD Alliance, which is the Science of Learning and Development. And I'll make sure that Eileen has access to, not just the slides, but some of these resources to share with all of you after. What's so interesting about the SOLD Alliance is, in their work, is that they were really looking at kind of whole child development. So looking at the relationship between the social emotional and the academic, but also kind of linking all of these other components, cognitive, ethical, physical, psychological development, and went really deep into how to support young people. CASEL, I think originally was focused more on the what, what skills, what competencies, and they've since evolved tremendously. But there's some really interesting research coming out from the SOLD Alliance that looks very deeply into the types of supports that are required to support young people's development, and different types of settings, and where learning takes place. And one of the folks has been very instrumental comes out of the Forum for Youth Development, and she says something I love. She says all learning is social and emotional. And in our journey at NatureBridge, just that reframing really helped when we were not thinking about it again as like a Tuesday off the shelf, at 9:30. We did find in the beginning stages of our work, many organizations could point to, oh, well, we did a team building challenge, or, oh, that's, we were doing journaling, that was SEL, and weren't necessarily thinking of, oh no, when we were collecting water samples down by the creek, that was an opportunity to support SEL as well. When we had students engaged in science talk and they were thinking about how to respectfully disagree and, argue from evidence and, really engage in that kind of discourse, that was an opportunity for SEL, as were the transitions coming from the bus and getting into the site, or, how we approach sitting on the ground, which may be new for some kids. So wanted to just point out another resource that, again, I think is kind of rising in prominence in how we think about young people's development. Great. So I am going to ask for some audience participation. We are going to shift away from this screen in just a moment, and I'd really love for you all, we're going to kind of continue to explore this link between effective EE, environmental education, and social and emotional learning. So the link is there, and I'm going to ask Eileen, are you able to plunk that in?
I'm working on it. Bear with me just a sec.
Okay, great. And let's see if I know my little share screen notes kind of popped away from me, so oopsies.
Estrella, the link is now in the chat box.
Okay, excellent. So I'd love for us to think about this first question. And we can turn our attention here. So if you're new to Padlet and you are going to be doing some online instruction, I'm excited to share a new tool with you. I'm relatively new to Padlet as well. I'm hoping that I did this right in setting this up, and that you all are able to engage with it. It should be accessible to anybody. But I'm hoping that we can start with this first question. So when you think about environmental education, you think about what makes for effective EE, where you see your students growing, you see them thriving, they're engaged. What characteristics come to mind? And the way that you can participate with Padlet is if you have a thought, you can actually add it right here. So I'll start and add one. So student-centered is something that comes to mind, where students are really engaged in the process. And would love to hear others' thoughts. Excellent. Okay, we're seeing experiential, hands-on, safe, inspiring spaces, place-based, making connections. This is great. Yeah, some really valuable ideas. Team building, inquiry. Yeah, getting dirt under your fingernails, having that real authentic experience, right? Actually, not just reading it in a textbook, but really living and breathing it. Promoting wonder, rooted and grounded in science, absolutely. Having time to explore and reflect. Curiosity, one of my favorite words. Yeah, in context with the place and community. Investigation. Outdoors, we hope. Yeah, as much as possible. This is terrific. Great. And we can keep going with this if you have additional thoughts. And I am going to add in our next question. So side by side, let's think about what some elements are of effective SEL. So when we think about what we just learned, what we've seen in our own practice, what comes to mind? What is the teacher or instructor doing? What are the students doing? What's happening? I should edit that. All right, there we go. Also student-centered, self-reflection, hands-on learning. Yeah, team building. Student-led. Helping to support those connections between the student and the land. That word curiosity is coming up again. Setting and achieving positive goals and relationships. Understanding feelings, how to express them. Self-awareness, also observational. Yeah. Oh, I missed this one down here about environmental education. So more personal motivation, working with environment and animals. Challenges thinking, going back to SEL, reflective. Great. I see folks adding some topics as well. So caring for living things, hands-on. We see exploration, culturally responsive. Right on. This is great. Well, I'm going to shift us back. We'll pause for a minute. We could probably spend all of our time just doing this. This is fun. Oh, excellent. I see some people who are, I think, contributing in the chat. I know not everybody was able to get into the Padlet, perhaps. So, yeah, caring for other living things. Great. Well, I think it's helpful to, kind of put these side by side, as well as then really kind of think about where we see the overlap. And I'm going to just kind of pause for a second to pull my notes back up. Okay, excellent. So I love hearing what you all said. I think you should have been paid to be the researchers because you'll see here a lot of overlap from the comments that you made, and just these are some of the leading studies that have summarized and pointed to what a number of different researchers found to be most kind of common across lots of different program types, looking at what the practices and the characteristics are. So we see that experiential engagement, totally reflecting hands-on, that cooperative group work or that team building, student-centered, a term that came up a number of times. And this is one that's really interesting, that the educator's passion for this subject. And, I think in SEL, especially being able to model what it is you're hoping for students to be practicing. Reflection, we talked about that and those connections. Yeah, personal relevance, and especially in that setting and the context of where you are, and supporting multiple viewpoints. So you can see many of the things that we mentioned here articulated as this is really what we see, expressed in common practices supporting effective environmental education. And when you line that up, side by side with effective SEL, it's just really fascinating to see where there is tremendous overlap and where there are places where, I look at effective SEL and it says physical and emotional safety. And I go, well, of course that needs to be present in EE. And especially when we're doing outdoor learning, wanting students to feel really comfortable and safe in that physical space, which might be really new for them. And so for me, it helps to kind of have that crossover back and forth where if I don't see something there on that effective SEL side, reflection is not listed there, but we know that's such an essential part of, quality SEL. So you can just see how closely, SEL and environmental education, environmental literacy are intertwined, and how necessary it is, that they be supportive of each other. So in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to kind of practice what we just talked about by participating in a reflection activity that supports some of the competencies that we mentioned. And then you will have an opportunity to be broken up into small groups to share a little bit about your process. Conocimiento is a Spanish term meaning having knowledge of. Conocimiento stems from the Chicano movement, collectivizing experiences and building bridges between personal perspectives. It means to validate the collective wisdom of the group in terms of learning and actions. And I like to think about it as a verb. So when we, when we engage in conocimiento, we are engaged in remembering the value of and assembling all of the strengths within this community. So we're going to come back to how Eileen started us off, kind of getting ourselves grounded and present. I'm going to ask you to sit comfortably with your feet solidly on the floor if you're able. Imagine energy gently spiraling upward from the base of your spine, up through the crown of your head. Let your arms relax and place your palms on your thighs. Soften your face. Relax your shoulders. If you're able, please put down everything you may be holding and take a deep breath in and a slow breath out. Take another deep breath in and a slow one out. Notice the rhythm of your breath. To breathe deeply, we begin by first exhaling, then taking a deep breath in, and allowing your ribs, back, and sides to expand. When you breathe out, just relax. Relax your face, shoulders, and just let go. Now take a moment to recall being in a special place, one of your favorite places in the world. You could be somewhere in nature. You could be engaged with people. You could be curled up in your bed. If your mind is going back and forth, just pick a place. Now imagine that you're in that place. I want you to notice how you feel. Imagine being in this place where you don't need to wear the mask. You just get to be your own authentic self. This is a space for you to be aware of your authentic self, your great beingness. In this place, what colors would you see? Maybe you're able to recall what you might smell, what you might be hearing, what you would be feeling. Allow yourself to rest inside the comfort of this place and how you feel in it. In this place, you become aware of your own innate wisdom. It is a precious awareness that lives inside the gift of being alive. Ask yourself this question. What is a quality that I bring or offer freely to others? What is a strength that I have, that I feel when I'm in this place? It could be your courage, your patience, your gentleness. Name this quality as one of the many good qualities that you have. It is simply one example of your own unique awesomeness. I want you to take a few moments to be thankful for this strength. And now try to remember a time when you were enacting this strength. Remember how it made you feel to offer this strength freely to others. What is the scene? What were you actually doing? How do you operationalize this strength? How do you see this strength or this gift being supported in your day-to-day work. When we talk about these strengths, we're really referring to our values and elements of our internal moral compass. I'm going to ask you to take another deep breath and then come back to the full group. So in a moment, we're going to put you into small groups. Let's see, we've got, Eileen, I'd say groups of like 3 or 4. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for participating. We won't discuss this as a full group, but I just want you to kind of think about what that was like. I want you to notice how that felt. Maybe you slipped into sharing really easily with your group. Maybe you had folks that you recognize, that you know, that you already have a relationship with. For many of us, that might have felt pretty uncomfortable. In particular, you know, we don't often talk about our strengths or our superpowers, but I think it's really important for us and especially for our students to develop that self-awareness, self-confidence, pride. And I'm curious, maybe we can just do a little show of hands. How many of you went to a place in nature or the outdoors? Saw a lot of hands raised there. Yeah. There's some great research that you know, evidences that even just thinking about the outdoors, seeing a picture of a place, can do wonders for our mental as well as our physical health. And so even when many of us stuck on the computer, and here in California, we're not really able to go outside these days because of the smoke and air quality, which is just heartbreaking. It's like, this is what we have right now, is the outdoors. But being reminded of all these places I love and I know I will get to, you know, again, someday is really heartening. Well, the activity that we just did is in this resource I'm now going to share with you. It is called Self-Reflection, that Conocimiento activity, and I'll point to it in just a minute. But I'm just really excited to share this resource that I hope you will find valuable. This website, growoutside.org, it came together through a collaboration of just one program type within the broad field of environmental education, and that's residential environmental learning centers. Our programs are typically based, you know, outside city centers, often on public lands, where students live on site for multiple days, learning alongside their classmates. I also want to just call out that the term residential can be triggering in Indigenous communities in particular, as it can bring to mind the practice of boarding schools. And I think this serves as an example of just how important it is to be aware, again, of that larger context and to tend to the historical trauma that may exist even in the present day. Just as some participants may be uncomfortable or fearful of the overnight component, for others, you know, just being in a natural setting can be challenging and feel unsafe. And as educators, we need to be aware of these potential challenges and bring empathy, understanding, and compassion to our programs, doing our best to help participants feel safe, to feel welcomed, and to be included. Within this toolkit, you know, there is some content that is specific to residential programs, and I'll point that out. But, you know, as you'll see, much of it can be used in any type of outdoor learning or EE setting. So I want to actually dive in a little bit and just point out some of the features and kind of give you a little taste for a couple of the things that I'm hoping will be most useful for you. And I guess first I'm going to do a little check. I am looking at the site myself. Is that what you are seeing?
Yes, we can see you on the site.
Okay, terrific. Awesome. So this was the result of a collaboration, as I mentioned. There were 11 programs, including the Beatles Project, that participated, programs from across the United States that were selected out of, gosh, we probably had 65 applicants. And we spent a year looking at social and emotional learning, like how does it show up? What are we seeing in our programs? How are we talking about SEL? All with the end goal of developing some common language, really being able to articulate, like, we are a place where SEL happens. It happens naturally. And also wanting to have tools that would be useful that we could bring back to our sites and share with our colleagues. And so that's what you see here. And so there's a few things I want to point out. One is just this list of tools. So if you're someone that is like really eager for something you can print out, something you can try, this place lists everything that we have on the site that is downloadable or that was created in this, with the collaborative group process. So you can see, yes, there is a section on residential. Some of these could be applied to day programs as well. In particular, thinking about transgender and gender expansive youth, thinking about, if you incorporate weather programming or if you eat meals together, so sure, they happen in a residential program, and there may be some like specific language around that, but really there's a lot of other types of programs that might also utilize a group welcome and orientation, for example. Yeah, so this is one of my go-tos when I'm like, what's that thing again that I know I wanted to use? It can be a great place to go. The first thing I also wanted to point out is this reflection tool. And this can be just a really useful place to think about what all of these different components are. Our recommendation is that this is a type of tool that you would utilize, with a team, that you would spend time kind of thinking about it, doing the work on your own, coming together to discuss, and then choose actions. It's not an evaluation tool. It's really meant to kind of guide your reflection about different aspects of your program. And I'll just point out a few for, example. So thinking about your organizational context, really understanding even like, do we have a mission and a vision and a set of values? Getting into questions about how we respond to the community around us. Are we in conversation with that community? So you can see things that might not first come to mind when you think about SEL, but when we're really thinking about the culture as a whole, and so that organizational structure, when we went back to that CASEL competencies wheel and we were thinking about like school culture and what happens outside the classroom, this is where we look at what's happening in our organization to support SEL. Thinking about our hiring policies, are we building trust in our organization? Do we offer professional development? Are there opportunities for people to grow? I'll slide down to a different section just so we can see. So field practice, this is where I think most of you are going to be especially interested. So we use the term instructors. That could be interchangeable with educators, teachers, but people who are doing the work with students. So, thinking about safety and boundaries, to what degree is that happening, or is that clearly communicated? Thinking about establishing group agreements or norms with participants, helping them to understand what's being expected of them. Emphasizing and, really using inclusive language, training our staff, talking about what it means to use inclusive language. I'll slide way down just to give you another example or two. So here's that residential piece. A lot of this, relates to kind of what's happening overnight. But, again, could be transferred to whatever program type you're in. And then this piece is, important as well, really thinking about how are we communicating what we're doing to other stakeholders? Are we able to articulate, what SEL means in our community? Are we in relationship with other stakeholders in helping to support common goals? So one tool that I want to recommend you take a look at, it tends to summarize kind of everything else that you'll see throughout the rest of this website. There are a few in the field practice section as well that people I know have been really excited about, and so I wanted to share those out. If you're looking for something that helps to kind of articulate outdoor learning in SEL, and helps to kind of make the case. This one here, this Beetles SEL concept paper, we hired the Beetles Project, which is a group out of the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley that has been studying outdoor science. And they created some materials for us that live on their website. So this is one of them. It's a concept paper that really helps to articulate kind of outdoor learning and science instruction and how best to support SEL. That's my little person making some noise in the background. You can see there's a lot of, just information about kind of some of the characteristics that you see in outdoor learning and how SEL is supported, through sequence, through depth. And let's see what I wanted to point out in particular in the targeted instruction. And then I see there are some chats, so I want to pause there as well and make sure to attend to that. So some of the tools here that can be really useful, in particular, one of the great women that we worked with during our work was a consultant out of Arizona, and she had worked in lots of out of school time settings and formal education settings, and she had this great prompt that she would always ask us. She said, "Oh, but did you debrief? Because if you didn't debrief it, then it didn't happen." Which was like a little harsh, but pretty true, right? Like we need that process to really think about what did we learn and what are we retaining and how do I apply it to my own life. And often that can be the first thing to go when we get crunched for time. And so looking back at the CASEL competencies, really thinking about, we often tend to go to the same debrief questions. We get very comfortable as educators, right? You have your go-to icebreaker, and you kind of have, this is kind of what I ask at the end of an activity. And I was really amazed when we turned to our educator staff to really think about what else could we be asking and how might it support development in one of these competencies. You might see questions that are in more than one place, or just worded slightly differently. But this is one resource that I wanted to share as something that you might be able to use tomorrow. And there's another version of this that actually can be printed out onto index cards that you can have in your back pocket, or that you could even turn over to a student and say, hey, if you use roles, which a lot of people in outdoor programs, might have a hydrator that day, someone who's going to toast with their water bottles, or, a navigator who helps to find their course, find their way. You might have somebody who is going to choose a question to ask the group after an activity. And you could turn the card right over to them and say, hey, we're thinking about self-awareness today. Will you pick up a question for us? So just wanted to point out a few of the things that we've found useful. I do hope you'll play around a whole bunch more in this site and see if there's other stuff that might be interesting to you. All right, I want to check in on the chat as well.
It's mostly been adding some other information. And I guess this might be a great place to pause for a moment and just see, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the chat.
Okay. Well, I do hope that you'll spend some time checking that out yourself. So I just wanted to kind of call out a few things in particular. They'll be here on this slide as well, some of the ones I just mentioned, so that when this gets shared with Eileen, you'll know exactly where to find those particular resources in some of the follow-up materials. So I want to close with one more reflection, and this is one I love to do with students, and it's not on the website, so this is an Estrella special, but probably one that you've utilized yourself. Threw a lot of content at you. Hopefully there was something that resonated with you today, something that you got excited about. I hope that you enjoyed getting to connect with some other folks and share your strengths. I love using all sorts of different inspirations from the natural world. This activity can be done with, parts of a tree, kind of thinking about whatever you're studying. I haven't heard folks use it for rock formations, but I don't see why not. But for today's activity here in California, we're really wishing for some rain with all the fires that we've been having. So I thought I would kind of channel that through this webinar, put some of that juju out to the world. But I'd like you to kind of pause and just think about how you are feeling today. We're a little ways into the school year. I saw early on that some of you are going into programming soon. Some of you are doing programming already. How are you feeling today? And just to think about how that body of water represents how you're feeling. I think if I were doing this with students, I'd be breaking them up into small groups then to share, and coming back, we'd reflect on, what that felt like. And did you find yourself connecting to something that someone else said? Did anything surprise you in that share? And I'll close, by saying just that metaphor can be such a powerful tool. It's a way to help develop connections to the natural world, while giving people a way of exploring their feelings and thoughts. So today we're not going to break up into the smaller groups just in the interest of time, but I encourage you to try asking a question like this perhaps the next time you have a physically distanced dinner party, or chat with your kids around the dinner table and try it out with some students. Speaking of students, it's just so great to see their faces, to remind ourselves of why we're all here, why we do this great work. It feels especially timely in these challenging and unprecedented times. Coronavirus has stripped away the layers of artifice and barriers between us, leading us to remember what is most important: how the connections we have and will build with each other will nurture and sustain us. SEL is critical for supporting students to connect and learn and develop meaningful relationships with adults and instructors. SEL is essential in a healthy working environment, whether that be within the walls of a classroom, on a trail, or in the staff room. So I want to just open things up. Again, if there are any questions, give folks an opportunity to share out. Think about what you will take away with you, if there was something that you saw or something that you thought about that you might incorporate into your own practice.